What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Untamed Outdoorsmen. And today we are back on the channel once again, doing a unique video on the channel. We've done plenty of build series videos across different kayaks over the years, but today we are back with a one-off video installing a bow-mounted trolling motor on a native Watercraft Slayer Max 12.5. So on this channel, we've dealt with the now discontinued Titans, I guess, the Titan X, Ascend kayaks, you name it, Bonafide PWR, XTR, you name it, we've done it on this channel. But we've never done a Slayer, either size or the new LTE we have not done. So this will be our first Slayer that we're working on. And we're doing a one-off video today, installing a bow-mounted trolling motor as a favor to help our friend Jason, who is an extremely great guy and just a great person all around. But I do actually want to shout him out, and I want to shout his podcast channel, the Bay State Breakdown Podcast, on YouTube and on Spotify as of right now. Anybody in the Massachusetts, New England area, I highly encourage you to check him out. It is a New England freshwater kayak bass fishing specific podcast. So if you are in the Massachusetts area or in the New England area, I highly encourage you to check him out. He's doing some really good stuff over there. He's kind of getting the ball rolling and he's kind of just getting started. But he's doing some really good things. So if you're interested in the local tournament scene, or you're interested in just general New England freshwater bass fishing news and updates, and talk with some of the higher up names in New England freshwater bass fishing, I highly recommend you check him out. He's doing really good stuff over there. So I wanted to make sure I said something and shouted him out. But we got a lot to unpack in this video. So the bow motor that we're going to be installing is going to be my old personal MotorGuide XI3. This is the saltwater version. I have used this thing for 2 hard seasons of use. I really loved this thing, and I'm really glad that this motor is staying sort of in my circle and I'll always see it. It's nice to know that it's going to a familiar face. We are going to be installing my old MotorGuide XI3 to this Slayer Max 12.5. So in case any of you are curious, I do have a professional background in these type of installations. And in my honest opinion, if you look through bow motor installs on Slayer Max 12s, in my opinion, there's a lot of videos out there that are lacking, to say the least. Hopefully this video is going to get a fresh perspective on a bow motor install and help some of you guys out. So we got a lot of products here. So we obviously have our MotorGuide XI3 here. We have a battery. This is a lead time 100 amp hour battery. I highly recommend lead time for a budget friendly battery. We have a 100 amp hour lead time battery. We have a one objective motor mount. We have a Noco snap top battery box. This is a Group 31 size battery box. Noco makes some great stuff. We have 2 battery tender plugs. So we'll get a little more into why we have 2 later on in the video, and I'll explain that. We do have 2 battery tender plugs here. We have some pull cords for our raise and lower lines and our deploy lines, things like that. We have some miscellaneous stuff here. So we have some carabiners for our raise and lower lines. We have some saddle clamps for wire management. We have some eyelets. We have some ring terminals. We have our overcurrent protection, which is probably the most important part of this install, our overcurrent protection. We've got some navigation lights, some battery powered ones from Guardian Angel. Some more eyelets, some more ring terminals. We got some Velcro, got different sizes of heat shrink, and we have our duplex marine rated tinned copper wire here as well. You guys know how much I love this type of wire for motor installs. We have some miscellaneous marine rated wire in case we need to make jumpers or anything like that. We have our old quick release plate, which we will be porting over to this one. So yeah, we got quite a bit to do here. We're pretty much going to go from bow to stern. We're going to start with the motor mounts and getting the motor mounted. Then we're going to worry about getting the wire run all the way to the back of the kayak here. But this is going to be a really good install. It's going to be a really fun install, and I'm really looking forward to this. So yeah, let's dive into this and let's do this the right way. Okay, so a few things to take note of with a brand new lithium iron phosphate battery. Whenever you get one fresh out of the box, before you use it or before you put any sort of power on it, it's an extremely good idea to charge these things up to full. They say that in a lot of their manuals and stuff, to actually, before you put any kind of load on it, any kind of juice, you do want to charge these things all the way up to full. And of course, make sure that it is with a lithium rated charger. You don't want to use regular like lead acid chargers. You want to use a charger that is specifically rated to do lithium. That is a very, very important thing with these batteries. You don't want to use like a regular lead acid car charger. Not a good idea with these. So definitely a lithium rated charger. So this is what I got here. This is a Noco Genius 5. I swear by Noco products when it comes to batteries and charging and things like that. So I'm going to get this hooked up. Okay. And then right here, 12 volt AGM, 12 volt lithium. So I'm going to leave that be for, I think 0 to 100, this will take about 20 hours. So I'll let this sit for a while, let this charge all the way up. And once it's fully charged, it'll just go into maintenance mode automatically. So I don't even have to touch it or worry about it. So yeah, we should be all set. I'm going to give this a time it needs to charge up and then we'll continue the install. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to mount our one objective plate to the kayak. So this is a very important part of the install because you need to give the hull the support it needs to survive long term with a bow motor on it. If you just install the motor straight on, it'll probably work for a little while, but ultimately it's not designed for that long term. So you need some support to accommodate this motor, especially if you were to hit a rock or something. It's just a very needless risk. So we have the mount from One Objective here. One Objective is a great company for this sort of stuff. So we have our mount here. This will also give us a new strong handle. And we also have our miscellaneous hardware, and we're going to dive deep into that, including a sticker. There is also the native Slayer Max mounting bracket, but we went with the One Objective one for a specific reason. We'll get into that a little bit later. So yeah, very cool. Let's get into it. Okay, so in the bag here of fancy nuts and bolts and hardware, we got a few different things. So we have our threaded inserts that we need to install to the mount, and this is what the quick release is going to mount to. Just in all 4 of these spots here. Then we're gonna have to hit them with a hammer. We have our 2 bolts for the back, and then our 2 bolts where the track originally is. It does utilize the original Native Slayer track, so this will be for that, and then these will be for the 2 back bolts. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to grab a hammer, and I'm gonna hammer these down nice and flat so we can screw things into that. So I'll get right back to you when I'm doing that. Okay, so obviously you don't need to turn into the Hulk and, you know, hit it with a sledgehammer. I just have a little like rubber mallet here, pretty much. It's got a rubber end on it. I'm just gonna give it some constructive persuasion right down here. So just like that. They're probably gonna fly all over the place, but it's fine. All right, perfect. Yep, we're good. All right, let's move on. Okay guys, so we are back at the Slayer 12 now. I do have some things that we need to talk about here when it comes to the One Objective mount. So the One Objective mount is a really good quality piece, but their installation video for the Slayer Max 12.5 showed a lot more hardware than what I got in the box. So it showed these like bolts with a really fat head on them that almost doubled as washers. I didn't get that in the kit, and I also didn't get the right length bolts for the quick release plate. The ones provided by MotorGuide were too long, and the other ones in the kit were too short. Definitely make sure you want to plan for that. So what I ended up having to do is I ended up getting some stainless steel washers and some stainless steel bolts with the right length. So I'm hoping these will solve our issue. I just got them at Ace Hardware, so no big deal there. So yeah, we're gonna continue, but definitely keep that in mind because that's something to definitely consider here. Just something to be aware of. So, all right, so I'm leaving this handle loose for a minute because we gotta slide our pucks on. All right, so I'm just gonna use one of my stainless steel wash. So the stainless steel washers are going to go on the spots that are not the quick release plate. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is where the store provided washers will go. And I'm just keeping everything loose right now on purpose. Okay, now I'm going to tighten up the handle. So the One Objective plate's still loose, but I'm tightening the handle because we don't need it to be loose anymore. Okay, so now we're gonna get the quick release plate mounted up here. So like I said, the one objective mount doesn't supply any of these bolts. So what we have to do is I had to go to the hardware store, like I said, and get some specialty stainless steel hardware. So the hardware that we're gonna be using in this video is 1/4 20 thread, 1 1/4 inches in length is the right thread and length for this particular application. So MotorGuide quick release plate and one objective mount. So this should work almost perfect. You don't want to go too long, because if you go too long on these back screws here, it'll actually start to dig into the hull. So it has to be like an almost exact length. So get these guys mounted up. That's perfect. Perfect length. You want it in stainless steel, just so there's no risk of any long-term corrosion issues. There we go. We are mounted up, nice and strong. So this will work extremely well long term. The key with a bow motor is designing it for long-term use. So let's grab our motor. Beautiful. All right. So next up, we have to get our plug installed. So we're going to be doing the battery tender plug. The battery tender plug, in my opinion, is the best plug on the market for kayaks. But we're going to start doing the battery tender plug in the bow, and we'll show you where we mount it and how we're going to run the wire. Okay, so now it is time to mount our motor plug on the bow. So like I said, we have the battery tender plug here. I die by the battery tender plug. I think it's hands down the best trolling motor plug on the market right now. The reason being is because it's all ring terminal based, so it is solely dependent on getting good quality crimps. Unlike a lot of the other like cheaper plugs that you strip the wire back and you kind of like push it into the plug and tighten it down with the screws. I'm not a fan of those. They tend to work themselves out, especially on high vibration environments like kayaks when they're bouncing on the road or, you know, on the water, whatever it may be. I like plugs that have secured mechanical connections, and the battery tender plug does that for me. It's a little bit pricier than your average plug, but I firmly believe that, you know, if you're not going to do it 100% correctly, you shouldn't do it at all. So that's kind of how we're approaching this. So we got the battery tender plug here. We have our side that goes on the motor, and we have our side that goes in the hull. So this is the side that we have to drill in the kayak for. So, you know, I know drilling into the hull is daunting and scary for many. My advice is it's not as bad as people make it seem. Just measure as many times as you can. Take your time. Don't rush. Don't be in a hurry. When it comes to stuff like this, you know, if you're not 100% comfortable doing it, my advice is don't do it. So I am going to mount it right here. I'll give you guys a close-up look. Right on this flat surface of plastic here. It's going to go right around here. So let's do it. So thankfully with these battery tender plugs, they do provide a nice paper template for you. I'm just going to use some electrical tape to hold down the template. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, and this just guarantees that we don't have a bit that walks on the plastic, I do have this punch here. Now, I'm going to set this punch to an extremely light setting because we're only dealing with plastic here, and you don't need anything crazy here. This is just to put a minor little nick in the plastic so we can drill through it without the bit walking. Again, be very careful. So just make sure you're 100% happy with the location. In this case, I am. So find the dead middle, punch. Okay, and the best part is you can reuse this template if you want to at a later date. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I am going to start with a very small drill bit and I am going to gradually go up. I do have, and again, the battery tender plug did not provide these, but I also have some number 10 3/4 inch stainless steel screws here. These are sheet metal screws, as long as they're screws. You can silicone these if you want to as well. I just find that it's easier to round off the plastic if you silicone them, but I might silicone them on the backside. So, okay. So you want to be very careful in your drill bit size selection here, because since we have screws and not bolts to mount this battery tender plug, you don't want to run a drill bit size that's the same thickness as your screws, because then they'll just fall right into the plastic. You don't want to do that. You want to downsize the drill bit so you have enough meat for the screw to grab onto. So we're going to start with a very small drill bit. We'll test it out. Probably won't work for this size. And then we'll keep going up very gradually in sizes until we know we have the right size. Jason, I know you're watching this video. Look away. You just want to make sure you angle your drill bit the direction the plastic is going. Okay. Second bit that I'm using is 3/32. Might be able to make that work. All right. So the hole saw that we're going to need is a 1 1/8 inch hole saw, and we have to do it on the 2 middle holes that we drilled. So again, Jason, you really should look away now. You're not going to like what I'm doing. I'm violating your kayak here. Okay, so now we are going to take a Dremel and we're going to get rid of this slice in the middle here. Should be pretty easy. Okay, so we have our Dremel here. This is just a regular like household Dremel, not anything crazy. I'm going to just remove the middle area here so we have a complete oval here. So I'm just going to remove these middle sections. Obviously, when you're working with Dremels, you should probably wear eye protection, not a bad idea. And then once we get it cut, we're going to use our sanding disc and we're going to clean up the whole interior section of the plastic. So, all right, let's begin. Okay, so it doesn't have to be perfectly exact because we're going to use the sanding disc and that'll get that all nice and evened out. So I'm not too concerned there. Sanding disc, probably going to get pretty loud, but... All right. So we can take off our eye protection just for rough mock-up purposes. I don't think we could have done that any better if I tried. So this looks beautiful. Awesome, man. All right, what we're gonna do is I am going to give you a rough mock-up of how this will look. So I'm not gonna screw all of this in yet, but it's gonna look pretty much like that. So there is enough bend in these wires to not really worry about this hitting. It is a tight squeeze, I will admit, with everything going on here, but yeah, so we're going to hook up the XI3 to the male end of our plug here. Positive, negative. Okay, so now we're gonna grab a 10mm wrench. You cannot use a ratchet on these, unfortunately. It has to be a wrench. It's the only way you can get in there. Again, these are all keyed, so you can't mess it up. Okay, so on each of these posts, there are washers, crush washers, and nuts, and these little sliders can come out, so just be careful of that. And these are 1/4 inch rings. There are already 1/4 inch rings on here. All heat shrunk down, so no concern there. You want to make sure that it's nice and tight on here. You don't want to risk these being loose or anything like that because that creates heat on the wires and could lead to melting of contacts if severe. So you always want to make sure you tighten everything down properly. Make sure that the crush washer is crushed. Yep, it is. So we're getting there. Then we'll do the same exact thing for the negative. Again, also 1/4-inch rings. And if you can, I would definitely use a heat shrink ring terminal or use heat shrink in general. Just because this is a high splash and high water environment over here. So you want to be careful with that. So now you obviously want to make sure you slide this thing on first through both the wires, then tighten them up. And then this goes over it. So one extra step that I'm taking that I normally do not do on bow motor installs like this is, since we drilled into the hull and not a power link plate like we usually do on our build series installs, I am going to hit the terminals with some dielectric grease. Now, since the power link plates are very accessible and you can easily get behind the posts of these battery tender plugs on those, we can't do that with this install. So I'm going to take an extra precaution when it comes to corrosion and add some dielectric grease to the terminals just to minimize any risk of long-term corrosion. Since this plug will be right near the water, I'm just taking a little bit extra precautions and making sure that we don't have any long-term issues when it comes to water or corrosion or anything like that. Obviously, make sure you're using tinned copper connectors as well. That's also pretty important, but I'm just going to lather it up. Okay, so again, dielectric grease, if you're using tinned copper connections and, everything is nice and secured, you shouldn't need any dielectric grease as long as you're using tinned copper. But since the plug location is in a really tough environment, it's going to see a lot of exposure to water, a lot of exposure to moisture. I'm just taking a little bit extra of a step here just to make sure that there's no long-term issues. So, sweet. There's this little steel holder here. That's just going to go right there. And then it threads into the screws to form a nice tight connection. So now what I'm going to do is we're going to grab our wire and we are going to strip and crimp our ring terminals onto the wire. Then we're going to put this in and then we're going to snake it all the way to the back. So we'll get to you when we're doing that. All right, so now we're going to move on to stripping and crimping our wire on the bow. So like I said, we're going to get our ring terminals installed on our marine rated wire here. Then we're going to attach our battery tender plug to the hull and then we're going to snake it all the way down. So a few things to keep in mind here. So when it comes to wire and wire gauge, I have a few things I got to say on this. So I highly recommend duplex marine rated tinned copper wire. So duplex is essentially this white coating that goes over both your positive and negative wires. You still have your red and black jackets here, but they're covered in this water and weather resistant coating, this white coating here. I highly recommend that. And then I obviously recommend tinned copper wire, marine rated tinned copper wire. You can theoretically use pure copper. It will power up the motor. However, there is zero corrosion resistance or anything like that whatsoever. So you're going to be fighting a losing battle with corrosion very early on. So the tinned copper is corrosion and moisture resistant. So I highly recommend getting that. There's no loss in conductivity with that whatsoever. So now, when it comes to wire gauge, so the right answer is that there is no right answer. And I am not going to tell you what the right wire gauge size is because it is different for every single situation and it varies on a lot of different factors. So there is no perfect right wire gauge size. There's no such thing. My recommendation is to consult one of three things. And that is the owner's manual for your motor is going to tell you the right wire gauge size based on the amperage of the motor and the distance from the battery. Both of those things go hand in hand. Distance and amperage. You can't have one without the other when sizing wire. So that's number one. Number two is to use ABYC certified wire gauge calculators based on the amperage of the motor and the distance from the battery. Got to make sure it's ABYC certified calculators. Or a good rule of thumb is to always size everything according to 125% of the load. So the wire and the overcurrent protection according to 125% of the maximum load. That's the ABYC guideline when it comes to overcurrent protection and wire gauge is 125%. So the wire that we have here, again, it's different for every situation. This is 4 gauge wire. Now, 4 gauge wire is a little bit big. I will admit it's a little large. However, for our specific situation and our distance from the battery, 6 gauge was going to be the right size. However, we were creeping pretty close to the requirement of 4 gauge. So I decided it's better to be safe than sorry. So we're going to go one size higher to 4 gauge. In this application, there's nothing wrong with slightly oversizing your wire. However, there's a fine line where it becomes useless. If I were to put like 2 gauge or like 1 gauge on this hull, it would serve nothing. It would do nothing. It would protect you from nothing. There's no benefit in doing that. So keep that in mind. There's a fine line where slightly oversizing is perfectly fine, but if you go too big, it's a complete waste. So keep that in mind. However, there is only risk and only harm with undersizing wire. So make sure you got the right size wire at a minimum. And if you want to go slightly above, that's fine. But I wouldn't go too far larger than what's recommended because there's no benefit in doing that. So now we are going to strip this duplex wiring back. We're going to strip our wires, then we're going to crimp on our 4 gauge ring terminals, then add some 1/2 inch 3-to-1 adhesive lined heat shrink. And we are going to go above and beyond on the looks factor. We're going to clean this up as well. So let's begin. So we got our 4 gauge wire here. I am going to take a razor blade. You have to be careful, but I am going to find the dead middle of each of these wires, so where there's no coating. And I am going to slowly begin to cut into that. And you just kind of want to wiggle the wire around as well, just so it's easier to bite in. But you want to be careful because if you go too far into the red or black jacket, you're going to have to redo it because it's going to expose some copper that's not necessary. So, and obviously be very careful with your fingers here. This is a risky thing to do if you're not careful. So obviously be very mindful of the razor blade because I have cut my finger open doing this. So be very, very careful. Okay, I'm going to call that good. So now, as you can see, when we peel back our duplex coating, we got our full red and black wires here. I'm just going to take our scissors and I'm just going to cut our excess. It doesn't have to be perfect. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. It does not have to be perfect because we're going to clean it up later. Okay, so now I am going to take, this is 1 inch 3-to-1 heat shrink, and I'm going to cut a small piece off. No more than, that's good right there. And this is a purely aesthetic feature. You don't necessarily have to do this part. But I'm going to take our large heat shrink and I'm going to slide it over both of our wires. And I'm going to bring it halfway down our duplex. So you got 50% of this heat shrink is covering our positive and negative. The other 50% is covering here. So I'm going to go grab our heat gun. I'm going to just heat this up. Okay, so what that does is it just helps clean up the aesthetics a little bit. It just makes it look nice. It's not a super mandatory thing, but it does make it look a little bit better. And it may help a little bit with strain relief if that is an issue for you. For us, that's not a huge deal since it's going to be mounted in a specific spot. But okay, so now next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to strip our positive and negative wires. And I have this nice stripper here. I like this one a lot. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now we're going to grab our 4 gauge 1/4 inch ring terminals. We're going to strip and crimp these guys on. Make sure you grab an appropriately sized crimper. This one can do 4 gauge, so just make sure you don't use a crimper that's not rated to do the wire gauge. If you don't have one, buy one. I'll leave a link in the description to this one if it works out pretty good. Perfect. All right, well, that worked pretty good. And now really, really pull on it. Do not be afraid. Pull on it as hard as you possibly can. Now is the time to make mistakes. So pull on it as hard as you possibly can. You almost want it to fail, because if it does fail here, you can correct it. If it fails out in the water, that's a disaster. Now we're going to take our 1/2-inch heat shrink. Okay, so now we're just going to repeat exactly what we did on the negative side. 1/4-inch ring, crimp that down, heat shrink on that, and we'll be good to move on. All right, so we're good on this side. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna hook up our battery tender plug to this. Gonna grab our 10mm wrench. Okay, and now just obviously make sure everything's tight. Give it a really good wiggle test. Just triple check for your own sanity. Everything is tight. So now we are ready to put this into the kayak. Okay, gonna just feed it in. Doesn't have to be perfect, just get it in there. Okay, so now we're in. One thing that you don't want to forget too, your gasket. So put your gasket on. Okay, so we got our plug physically on the kayak now. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little tiny bead of silicone across the bottom here, just because there's always going to be splashes coming up here. So I'm just going to, little trick when dealing with silicone, wet your fingers. Just a little bit around here, because again, there's always going to be high levels of splashing going on here. So just so there's no risk at all, we're just going to mount that there. Add some RTV. Good. All right. So that's done. Now, before we continue, we are going to actually drill our second battery tender in the back. I have a specific spot in mind for that. So yeah, we're going to continue and let's get after it. Okay. So next up, I am going to mount our now fully charged battery in the hull here. So just like that. Beautiful. Okay. Okay, we do have a strap here as well, which is nice. So this is the Noco BG31 battery box, in case any of you are curious. And it does pop right on. It's great. Awesome, man. Okay, just for reference on how this will go. Just like that. So utilizing the landing gear arm there. So it's going to mount like that. The batteries, the cord's going to come right down. It'll go right here. So we're good. So now we have our second battery tender plug. So I received a few comments in our Bonafide PWR bow motor install. I received a couple comments because we also use 2 battery tender plugs. And a couple of you questioned, do you need the second battery tender in the rear? And my answer to that is it has to come out from the hull in some manner. However you wish to do that is your choice. For us, I like having this battery tender plug because it basically serves as our own connectees, pretty much. The company connectees, they make like those quick connects for motors. This basically becomes connectees plug. So we are just going to repeat exactly what we did up at the bow over here. And this is a completely 45-degree angle area here. So yeah, we're just gonna repeat what we did up at the bow down here. Okay, so we got our punches made. Okay, got our holes. Now the two center holes. Jason, look away. Okay, drilled. Now I'm going to grab our Dremel, cut out those center pieces. Okay, so now I'm going to use our snake slash like fish tape, whatever it is, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to use this and I'm going to get this up to the bow. And we're going to tape this onto our 4-gauge duplex and we're going to snake it back here. So okay, so I know you probably can't hear me as well as you did before. I don't have the mic on. But I am going to repeat exactly what we did at the bow with the battery tender plug. I'm just going to repeat it here. So I'm not going to do a whole lot of talking because you guys just saw that. I'm just going to repeat exactly what we did over there back here. So yeah, let's do it. I'll record it, but I may not talk much. So again, I am going to put some dielectric grease on both of these contacts that are inside the hull. Odds are these posts are never going to see sunlight again in their life. It's not easily serviceable, so I'm just going to make sure that there is absolutely zero risk of corrosion or anything like that, or anything negative that could happen to these wires. I'm going to make 100% for certain that there's no risk of any of that, because this is not a serviceable situation. It's not like a power leg plate on my Native that I could just pop that out and look behind it. So you can't really get behind these plugs normally. So I'm just going to load these up with some dielectric grease just so there's no chance of anything happening even years down the road. All right, everybody, so now we are on to the wiring outside of the hull. So we got our battery tender plug mounted back here. We have obviously our battery tender plug mounted up there as well as the motor. But now we are going to run our wiring from the battery tender plug back here to our battery. We're obviously going to run our wire to the battery, but we do have to add our overcurrent protection. So I've said this a number of times on this channel, and I'm going to keep saying it as long as I keep seeing people that treat overcurrent protection as optional and skip it. I'm going to keep saying this until I stop seeing that. Breakers and overcurrent protection as a whole is a non-negotiable safety requirement. I cannot stress that enough, and there are no ifs, ands, or buts about that fact. If an electronic of any kind does not have proper overcurrent protection, you immediately create a dangerous install for you, your gear, and the people around you. So I cannot stress that enough. You know, I see a lot of things on the internet, a lot of people that pretend it's no big deal or skip over it or treat it as optional or think it's some like macho man thing to not put overcurrent protection. I will never understand the reasoning behind that, because if you don't have something there to break that flow of current in the event of an electrical failure, that's a fire. That's a fire waiting to happen. It's going to burn up your devices, it's going to destroy your wiring, and it's probably going to cause a fire on your kayak or your boat. So please, any electronic that gets power, make sure it has proper overcurrent protection. So need to make that abundantly clear as I can make it. In terms of sizing breakers, so I've talked about this a few times on the channel as well. The best way to size a breaker is to look at the owner's manual for that device. So for example, our MotorGuide XI3 draws 52 amps maximum, and MotorGuide recommends a 60 amp breaker. And this is what we have right here, a 60 amp breaker. If you're in a situation where you can't find the manual or the item that you're using doesn't disclose what overcurrent protection they recommend, the best bet is to size it to 125% of the maximum load of the device. Then the next closest breaker size down. I'm pretty sure that 125% of 52 is 65. So the closest breaker size down to that is 60 amp breaker. So that's the best way to size overcurrent protection. You don't want to size it like right to the max output of the motor. So like a 52 amp fuse, I don't even think they make that, but if you were to run something that goes right to the max output of the motor, it's probably going to nuisance trip, and it's going to trip when it doesn't need to. So 125% is the golden rule according to ABYC when it comes to sizing overcurrent protection. Or when in doubt, always consult your owner's manual for that. But again, non-negotiable safety requirement. If you don't have it, your install is dangerous. No debate, it's dangerous. So when it comes to circuit breaker placement, the golden rule, according to ABYC, is to be within 7 inches of the battery on the positive side. So that's what we're going to be doing here. We're going to keep it within 7 inches of the battery. So at a maximum of 7 inches worth of wire. You know, I see a lot of people who put breakers further away, or people who put them up at the bow, things like that. That's a fire hazard. Do not do that. because in the event of a short or anything goes wrong, all of that wire going up to the breaker is completely unprotected. So always get it as close to the battery as humanly possible, maximum of 7 inches away. So we're going to follow that rule, no further than 7 inches for this installation. I would have loved to have mounted it on the top here like we did on our Garmin Force Current, but with this battery box, it's not going to be possible. So we're going to mount it in the air in between our battery tender plug and the battery here. It's perfectly fine that it's in the air. Just 100% confirm that your connections are tight and you won't have any problems. So, all right, let's begin. So first off, we have to make a jumper from our breaker to the battery, and then our breaker to the battery tender post, and then the negative is just straight to the battery tender post. So we'll begin now. We have some miscellaneous 4-gauge wire here. If you want to just use the duplex wire that you already bought, you can do that. You can just strip back that white coating. But for this install, we're just going to use some miscellaneous 4-gauge that I have. Okay, so the battery post on this particular battery here is a 5/16 post. So we have a 5/16 ring terminal. I'm going to use our crimpers and crimp this guy down. All right, so now we're working on the positive side. The negative side has a 5/16 ring on it, and then a 1/4-inch ring for the battery tender. But this, our positive side obviously has to go to the breaker. So the breaker does take 1/4-inch rings as well, so that's convenient. But we have our roughly 6-inch jumper here. It's gonna go right here, then it's gonna go down. So it'll be a 5/16 ring here, then a 1/4-inch ring here. And then on the breaker, it's going to be a 1/4-inch ring. So we're good. Quarter-inch ring on this side, so 2 different ones. Okay. So like we said, this is about 6 inches for a jumper. So we are within our 7-inch requirement for overcurrent protection. So a really good thing to do while we're working on equipment, trip the breaker. So that way there's no risk of a short or anything like that while we're working here. Always a good idea to trip that breaker. And just to show you guys that there's no power going here, right? So tripped, I'm not going to touch it now, but tripped, nothing there. So we're good. So now, going to run a small jumper to go to our positive post. So, all right, so this one is 1/4-inch ring on the other side of the breaker, 1/4-inch ring on the battery post. All right, I'm going to strip and crimp this guy. Okay, so I got the sleeve for the battery tender on now. So you have to put that on first before you mount your actual terminals to the post. That has to go on. So then we'll tighten them all up. Then we'll get the battery tender plug situated. And then I think that'll actually be it for the wiring. Then we're going to move on to the raise and lower lines. So yeah, should be pretty good. So one little thing you should know about the battery tender plugs is these two prongs here are actually capable of moving, so it paints the impression like this is loose. It's not. I promise you it's not. As long as you get it tight as you can with a hand tool, it's tight. It's just that the whole post moves, so it kind of makes it seem like it's loose, but it's actually not. So just making sure that is known. Now we're going to take our top piece, put this back on. And then our little holding collar. Look at that, man. All right. So that is where we are at. All right. We are all mounted up. All the connections are secure. Just double check. Connection secured. Okay. All right. So that is it for having to strip and crimp wires. So that's awesome. Sweet. Okay. We do have some quick wire management things to talk about back over there, but yeah, for the most part, in terms of like what needs to be done, wiring wise, we're good. We still have to do the raise and lower lines, but we're getting close. Okay. So we're going to take a look at the bow section here. We're going to take a look at the wiring that we ran. So for a little cable management trick, I have these cool things, call them saddle clamps. They're basically a 3M adhesive on the back with a zip tie loop on the front, and then you can slide your zip ties through and you can run your wires across walls and ceilings and stuff. It's pretty cool. We use it pretty frequently. So how I have the wiring set up right now is it comes out the battery tender plug, it goes here, and then I want to run it up the wall back to the back battery tender. I'm going to take our zip tie. And I find that these things are actually pretty strong when you use more than one. Yeah, just to show you guys, it's 3M adhesive on the back with zip tie loops. Then you can just slide the zip tie through that and you're good. So yeah, I'm going to stick quite a few of these around and I'll show you the completed product. Okay, so we got all 4 in. I'm just going to take these flush cutters. They allow, when you cut the zip tie, it cuts it completely flat at the head of the zip tie with these, as opposed to like normal cutters. So I'm just going to take these. I'm just going to cut the tag ends of the zip ties off. Awesome. So now you can't even see the wiring. I'll get you guys a little bit better of a close-up look here. So as you can see, it's up there. It's up there somewhere. Yep, there it is. So it's up there, comes up, goes to the battery tender, somewhere over there. Yep, there you go, right there. So comes around and goes through the hull, but as you can see up here, can't even see it. So looks really good, looks really clean. You don't lose any access into this bow hatch, and I really like that. So yeah, we're gonna move on now to the raise and lower lines. Okay, so now we are working on the raise and lower lines for this motor. So we need to run 2 lines on this motor. One on the pedal, which deploys it, and then one on the collar, which can retract the motor from the seat. So we got a few things here that are actually pretty clever to get this figured out. So we are very lucky with this Slayer Max because the hatch actually has tracks on it, which is very, very clever and very nice to have. We have our lines here. These are actually lawnmower pull cords. They're designed for lawnmowers, so they're really strong with tensile strength, which is nice. So we have those. We have a set of carabiners here. I got a few different sizes to figure out what size works best. But I got a few different sizes, and that's going to go right on the little lip of the motor there. So we'll get that figured out. And then we have 2 different eyelets. So we have the Yak Attack eyelets, which is your traditional track-mounted eyelets here. So that's going to go right across the track. But more interestingly, these eyelets are M6 thread stainless steel eyelets, and this is actually going to go on the hatch. So I'll show you guys a better close-up. So right on the hatch here, we have these little bolts here that go on the hatch. So I'm actually going to replace it with this M6 eyelet. I am not the original person who came up with this idea. There's another video on YouTube on a Slayer Max, and I spent a very, very long time trying to find this eyelet, but I did eventually find it. So I have it right here, but you can angle it however you want. So this eyelet's going to go right here, and it's going to go up to this pedal to provide downward tension on it. Okay, so get this on. So now we can kind of play with this and figure out what's going to work best, but we're almost there. Now I'm going to grab the lawnmower pull cord. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to run it through both eyelets and then through our hinge eyelet. So now I can really adjust this to however I want. So we're gonna have to drill right in the center there, which is it's not a huge deal. So I think you guys can kind of see that, but there is a little like lip there. We're just going to. One size larger. Now I think we're good. Yep. All right, so I ended up finishing with a 3/16 inch drill bit, and this has just enough movement to move freely so you can easily remove it, but there's plenty of meat there on the plastic to where it's not really a major concern. So we'll try that distance, see how it works. Love it. So I'm thinking the Stow line on the top of the motor could just be as easy as putting it through our little tightening collar bolt here. So you always want to make sure you burn off the ends of this kind of rope because it'll fray really bad if you don't. So this rope might be the one part of this install that I'm going to leave up to Jason and let him kind of figure out how he wants it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give him plenty of slack so he has plenty to grab onto. And we'll stop like right there maybe. Heck yeah, man. Huh. So, got our deployment, and that comes up. It's going to hit the door, but it will work, and then there we go. So, oh man, so I think that is it for the install. So let's do a full recap and let's talk about this a little bit. Okay, so we got our full bow to stern walkthrough here, so let's talk about this. So we'll talk about the motor first. So the motor obviously is my old personal XI3. You know, I loved this motor and I'm really happy it's going to a good home that I personally know. So we got our pull cord line right here. This is to pull the motor into the stowed position. So that's easy. Then we got our line here. So this is actually a lawnmower pull cord line. And then our deploy line, which is right here as well. And we got two Yak Attack eyelets. And then we have a M6 eyelet that actually replaces part of our hinge here and goes up to this carabiner, which deploys it. Obviously got our one objective mount with our quick release mount on top of that. We have our battery tender plug here, which is nice. We did dielectric grease the inside of this just to protect it from corrosion because there's probably going to be a lot of splash coming up. So that's pretty easy there. That's all set, all tightened up, ready to go. We got 4 gauge going through the boat, going all the way back here. So back here we have another battery tender plug. I know we talked about why we did 2 battery tender plugs. If you're curious and if you have to, it has to come back through the hull in some manner. However you wish to do that is your call. But for us, I like the battery tender plug. So right here we got battery tender plug. And we are going to open this up, take a look at it. So this is our Noco BG31 battery box. Definitely a good quality box here. Well, we got our lead time 100 amp hour battery, and with 2 5/16 rings here, and our 60 amp ignition protected circuit breaker. And I'm willing to bet if I trip this breaker, you guys will see some lights come on over there. So let me see if I can get this. All right, 3, 2, 1. There you go. All right, so it is on, and our breaker is untripped, and our lights are on. And so yeah, this install is complete, guys. This thing turned out great. I am super happy with how this turned out. I think this is as clean as we're gonna get, and I am just absolutely thrilled. So yeah, guys, let's do a proper outro here, and we'll see you guys in the next video. All right, everybody, so that is going to do it for today's video on installing a bow-mounted motor on this Slayer Max 12.5 from my personal friend Jason. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was a fun one to make. Again, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to this MotorGuide XI3 for the last 2 years of fishing. This thing has done extremely well, and it's served this channel extremely well, and it's, you know, we've had a blast using this thing. You know, so nothing but positive things to say about this. And I'm really happy that it's staying in my personal circle and it's going to a good home. So really, really excited about this. You know, it's an honor to have people put their trust in me to be able to do motor installs like this safely. I just think that's awesome. And, you know, I feel we did this install in a really professional and safe manner. And I'm really excited for Jason to get on the water with this thing and just use it and enjoy it and, you know, have a blast and really, you know, dial in his kayak fishing tournament rig here. He's already got a lot of great things going on with this rig, but this just takes to a whole nother level. So yeah, in terms of like future things to come for the videos here, guys, this Slayer Max is probably going to be a one-off video. There's no real build series with this. However, if you guys have been looking at our community tab, we have a pretty big group of videos coming here going over the all-new Native Hammer. That is not my personal kayak. I did not buy the Native Hammer. I am still rolling with the Titan X 12.5. But the Native Hammer, we are going to be doing a full build series on that kayak to help my friend Carl, to help him out and really dial in his new tournament rig. We're going to help him through a full build series on this channel. So again, I did not buy a Native Hammer, but there will be a Native Hammer build series here coming in the following weeks here, relatively soon. And it'll probably span throughout the course of a couple months. I'm probably going to spread those videos out a little bit. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave them down below, and I'll definitely answer them. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you.